Yesterday we were looking at denominational beginnings in colonial America. The first denomination that we considered was Anglicanism. And who were the two men that were mostly responsible for the spreading of Anglicanism in the colonies?
Blair and Bray.
Can you read this up there? Why do you say that? Blair and Bray. All right, and then we looked at the Baptists next, and who is given credit for being the one who starts the Baptist churches in America, who founds the first Baptist church? Brady?
Roger Williams.
Right, Roger Williams. And let's see if you can, without looking, see if you can tell me what one of the four main beliefs of Baptists were and are. Stevie, give me one.
Only baptizing confirmed believers.
Right. And what was the mode?
Immersion.
Right. Okay, that's one. Michaela? Okay, only regenerate people. What was the word you used? Christians. Okay, can become church members. What's another one? I got it off, didn't I? I was thinking the one that Michaela gave was the second one, but then I realized it wasn't. So backtrack. Lahana, what's another one?
Congregational polity.
Yes, congregational polity. And then what was the fourth belief? Anybody know?
Is it separation of church and state?
Yes. All right, so that's the Baptists. Now we move on to the Quakers. Who is the founder of the Quakers? Not in America, but back in England. Lydia?
George Fox.
Right, George Fox. And what did George Fox teach about how we know what to do? Brady?
An inner light.
Right, guidance by the inner light. And what were they opposed? To what were Quakers opposed? Lahana?
War, politics, and government. Wait,
Okay, war, politics as in holding political office, and government would be kind of the same thing. What's, oh, taking oaths, that's coming up there. Taking oaths. And those are the three things. Okay? Let's see. How would you describe their worship when they got together in their buildings, in their meeting house? How would you describe it? Sally?
silent
Right, silent. Until?
until somebody decided that the inner light told them to talk.
Right. Okay. So what didn't they have that most churches have? Jessica?
Singing.
I think they did have singing. If somebody felt like singing. I'm not sure. Sally?
They didn't have like the same pastor every time they had a pastor. It was just like whoever was
Yeah, they had no ministers. And what else did they have? They had no church ordinances. So no baptism or communion. Can you remember, without looking, can you remember the three distinguishing tendencies that eventually caused Quakers to go kind of separate directions? Do you remember any of those? Caleb?
Mystics.
Okay, the mystics rejected the Bible and just claimed direct revelation from God. Micah? Moralists emphasized good works. And what's the third one? Hayden?
Biblical.
Right. They're the ones that then begin teaching a biblical perspective and seeing atonement only through Christ, not through their inner light. Okay, next we have the Presbyterians, and who was the one who spread Presbyterianism throughout the colonies, or did most to organize the Presbyterians? Stephen?
His last name is McNamee.
Yes.
I forget.
Yeah.
Francis.
Yes, Francis McNamee.
Legend.
And how would you describe the beliefs of the Presbyterians? In a word, how would you describe their beliefs, Alex? Tulip, yeah.
Amazing.
Or Calvinism you can use as well. And what kind of polity did the Presbyterians have? What kind of polity did the Presbyterians have, Nate? Were you not here yesterday? Take a guess. What kind of polity would Presbyterians have? Yeah, okay, got it.
What?
All right, now we're going to move into what are called the continental denominations in America. That is those that came from the continent. Are you familiar with the fact that people that live in Europe call, or in England call certain countries on the continent, and then there's England that's not on the continent, even though it's part of Europe. You know, England, British Isles are islands. So any countries that are in Europe, you know, outside of the islands like that, which is called the continent. So these are continental denominations. The first one that we're going to look at are the Reformed groups. These are groups that came out of the Reformation, or churches that were formed as a result of the Reformation in Europe. And they were very similar in doctrine and practice to Presbyterians. So they would have all, Reformed is another word that's used for those that follow a Calvinistic system or that follow Tulip. The first one is Dutch Reform, and they would have been in what country? Joey?
Germany.
No. The Dutch Reform.
Holland.
Holland, because in Holland they're called the Dutch. I know you're confused because Germany calls themselves Deutsch,
Yeah.
but these are actually Dutch, not Deutsch. Okay? So they, Dutch Reform really did not have too many people come over. Some came to New Amsterdam, but not in great numbers. Next we have the Huguenots. Anybody remember who the Huguenots were? Caleb? French Protestants who are trying to escape the persecution from the Roman Catholic Church in France. And they scattered throughout the colonies. There's certain pockets here and there, but you find the Huguenots in the Carolinas, you find in Massachusetts, of all places, by the 18th century, and scattered throughout. Okay, and then later, or also we have the German Reform. The German Reform. Now these, for the most part, if you think about Germany, I can't take this down. Map of Germany. The northern area of Germany is primarily where the Reformation took place, where Luther nailed his 95 Theses in Wittenberg, which is right there. And much of northern Germany followed Luther, and so the church would have been called what? The followers of Luther had a church which was called what, Stephen? Lutheran. Now, in southern Germany, that remained largely Roman Catholic. And so the Germans there who came to Reformed faith didn't follow Luther. They were closer to Switzerland and Austria, and so they were influenced more by Switzerland and by Calvin. And so they didn't call themselves Lutheran, they called themselves German Reformed. That is, they were a Reformation church tied more to Calvin than they were to Luther, even though they're German. Everybody follow that? Understand that? So they're from southern Germany, and they came primarily to Pennsylvania. Although there are some churches in this area that were German Reformed. I know that just outside of New Middletown, there is a church called Old Springfield Church, and it originally was German Reformed. And then later on, the German Reformed Church became part of the United Church of Christ and became more and more liberal in its theology. But it was originally German Reformed. All right, any questions about the Reformed groups? All right, next we have the Lutherans. Lutherans did come over, and they were anything from Swedish to Dutch, but mostly German. And they came primarily to Pennsylvania as well. So Lutheranism was predominant in many parts of Pennsylvania as the Germans came over. The father of American Lutheranism is said to be Henry Muhlenberg, who is pictured there on the left. Henry Muhlenberg. All right, that's all I have to say about the Lutherans. Any questions? Oh, I forgot to ask. Well, I guess mostly because I doubt if we have any representatives here, but anybody go to a Dutch Reformed church? Been to one? Anybody have any Huguenot ancestry that you know of? Okay, how about German Reform? Anybody have any connection with German Reform? These are mostly old groups that are no longer around. All right, anybody Lutheran? Yeah, this is not a big area for Lutherans. You are a Lutheran?
I'm not, but my grandma is.
Your grandmother? Okay. There are a few Lutheran churches around, but in the area, but it's not heavily populated with Lutherans. And I suppose maybe even Germans in general. We don't have as many Germans in the Youngstown area as we do from other parts of Europe. Okay, let's go on to the next group then. We may find more of a connection here with the Anabaptist groups. Now we know from before that the Baptists in colonial America did not want to have the state and the church being closely related to one another. And so we find the Anabaptist groups in Europe refused to have anything to do with the state. They just ignored politics, political things altogether. Secondly, they stressed the importance of a holy, simple life. So in that way, you might say they're similar to the Puritans. They stressed living a holy life before God and living simply, not gaining a lot of stuff. They were followers of Menno Simons. That's where they get their name, from his first name, not his last name. Or one group of Anabaptists is called Mennonites, from Menno Simons. Then there was a splinter group off from the Mennonites called the Amish. And you're all familiar with the Amish. You see them not too far away from here, in Pennsylvania. Go up further north in Ohio, or southwest from here in Ohio, Holmes County. And you see lots of Amish. There are some around here. I saw a buggy in the middle of Columbiana one day. I've seen it. There's a sign coming into Columbiana, watch out for buggies. But I thought, why is that sign there? I've never seen any Amish buggies, but I did see one day. How many of you have seen an Amish buggy in Columbiana? Oh, almost all of you. Okay, where am I? I don't see these things happening.
I raised my hand because I thought you were going to say how many of you guys have seen an Amish buggy.
Oh, no,
I've
in
never seen one in
Columbiana.
Columbiana.
In Columbiana. Okay, every month. How many of you have been up to, or down to Holmes County? You know, lots of neat stuff down there. And mine's just not blank, the town up north of here near Burton. Oh, what's the name of that? Anyway, in that area there's lots of Amish as well. In fact, do you know that there are more Amish that live in Ohio than any other state? We think of Pennsylvania as being Amish, but there's more Amish living in Ohio. A lot in Indiana as well, and certainly Pennsylvania. Lancaster, Pennsylvania area has lots of Amish. It's a great place to visit. Yes.
My grandparents and aunt, and they live up in Worcester, and like right outside of Jonesville. And you're almost guaranteed that you're going to see an Amish buggy because somebody knows Amish. And they also have like this friend who's Amish, and he works in the house, and his name is Sam, and like, his work is Asian.
Yeah.
And he charges it like really cheap because they're allowed to get so much money. But like me and my dad likes to have like dinner and like he's on
Yeah, many of them are very nice people and very good workers. You can't say blanket anything like that about any group of people. They're always, in any group, there are always kind of people that are lazy and so on. But overall, Amish are used a lot in building houses. At one time, not so long after we moved into our house, they were building a house across the street. There were some Amish guys working on the roof, and one of the young men injured himself, cut himself pretty badly with something, and came over to our house to call his dad, because he's going to go to the hospital to see if he had a hospitalization and all that stuff. But interesting, very nice people.
We had the Amish, we had a group of them come take out like our kitchen and redo it when we had our house done.
Yeah, they're known for their woodwork, things like that.
Like on the road from my house, there are a good amount of Amish people, and in the summer they only go down the road by our house at night. So I'll just like be laying there in bed, and just hear like the forest go by,
Yeah.
and you look out the window and there are flashing lights on their buggy.
Yeah. Yeah, by law they have to have those because otherwise they get hit. Yeah, Stephen?
I have a question. You know the Amish market in Boardman?
Yes.
It's only open like 3 days or 2 days a week.
Thursday through Saturday.
Yeah. All right. How do they get there?
They come down by vans. They have large
People
vans.
take them? Or can
Yeah.
They,
Yeah, the Amish, most of them will ride in a vehicle owned by somebody else. They're just not allowed to own one themselves. They're allowed to use, back before cell phones, they're allowed to use somebody else's telephone, but they couldn't have one themselves. I've heard stories of how a person talked about their Amish neighbors always over on using their phone. So, okay, because they can't have their own, but she's on her phone all the time. Now they have cell phones. So now they can communicate big time, but they can't charge it in their house because they're not allowed to have electricity in their house. But some Amish communities allow electricity in the barn. Either that or in a town nearby, there's a place to charge their cell phones. Or they go to the neighbor and use their electricity to charge their phone. When we were traveling out west, we saw Amish people. So they travel, they get on these bus tours and stuff, and they travel around. Sometimes the whole bus of Amish will go places. Any other questions? Oh, did you know that the person in charge, the main carpenter who worked on the Ark built down in Kentucky was Amish guy. He's an older gentleman, and he made a statement because he was a really good carpenter, and he said he felt that his whole life of building things was merely preparation for building that. That was his life's work was to do that. Okay, well the Amish broke away from the Mennonites. Now the Mennonites, I should say distinctively, are not Reformed. They are on the opposite end of the issues of salvation. They are in what would later be called Arminian, although that wasn't a word yet. And the Amish broke away from the Mennonites over the issue of discipline. And one group felt that they should really have strict discipline. If somebody didn't abide by the rules, they were kicked out. And the other group said, don't be so harsh. And anyway, they split over that. And this was named after the leader of the splinter group. And there's close relationships. So sometimes people don't even notice the difference. If you're living in an area where the Mennonites are really conservative, they may dress very similarly to the Amish. The men not so much, but the women with the head coverings and things like that. Stephen mentioned the Amish market up there in Boardman. Very good place. How many of you have been there? I mean, the people there, the most people I've met there are really nice. They make good stuff. Cora's Bakery. She's making her own pies now. Raspberry pie is my favorite. It's so full. And of course, the donut place. What's the lady's name that does that? Great donuts. There's always a line. And just a lot of other good stuff there too. We like to go to the restaurant there. They have really good food. So if you haven't been there, you should go and plan on eating. and lots of good things to eat. And if you want to eat any furniture, they've got a large area devoted to Amish made furniture. Really good stuff. We buy a lot of meat there too. They've got a meat market, really good meat. Really recommend it. Okay, so anyway, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the Amish. They're interesting. And they were persecuted throughout Europe, and they came mostly to Pennsylvania. All right, any other questions about them? And the reason that they seem stuck in the 1800s or earlier is they don't want to be distracted by modern things. You know, they want to live a life devoted to God. Although theologically, they seem to be very works-oriented. Now, interestingly enough, there's been some awakening taking place in two Amish communities of which I'm aware. One over in Lancaster area and in Holmes County, where people are starting to understand the grace of God, and that's having an impact. And there's kind of a revival going on among the Amish. People coming to know the Lord who didn't know the Lord before. They were just following this works system. So interesting. Okay, let's go to what are called the pietist groups. Pietism is a reaction against spiritually cold churches. What happened, and I'll take the Lutheran Church as an example. In the Lutheran Church, doctrine is very important. You know, it's important to know what you believe, why you believe it. But after a while, the churches emphasized doctrine so much they forgot about the personal relationship with God. And so they became rather cold spiritually. And so there were those that reacted against that and said, okay, well, we want to emphasize relationship with God, and so we're going to get rid of the doctrine. So they kind of swung the pendulum the exact opposite way, and that's the pietists. So as a reaction against spiritually cold churches, they emphasized the importance of conversion and the necessity of a holy life, which certainly the Lutherans started out that way, but they kind of lost sight of that. But they downplayed doctrine. They kind of saw the culprit as being doctrine. Well, when you teach doctrine, when you teach all these things that you need to believe, that kind of puts up a barrier to really knowing God, and it's kind of anti-emotional. So they went the other direction. They downplayed doctrine, emphasized relationship and emotion more. The most important group of the pietists were called the Moravians. They were originally followers of John Huss, or Johann Huss of Bohemia, who was burned at the stake, you remember, as a result of the Council of Constance in the 1300s, I believe. They were known as great missionaries. They went all over Europe, even though they were persecuted by the Roman Catholic Church especially, but they went all over Europe spreading the word. They, in 1722, found shelter in Germany on an estate owned by Nicholas von Zinzendorf, and he was so impressed with them, he joined them and became their leader and led many of them over to America, where they established a community in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Their primary concern was evangelism. In fact, it's through the example of some Moravians on board a ship in a storm that John Wesley was attracted to know more about God, even though he was a missionary at the time, but didn't really know God. And these Moravians showed him something that he didn't have, and that kind of sparked his interest to look further into his relationship. All right, any question about the pietists? The main thing is that they said they downplayed doctrine and moved more towards the emotional side and emphasized a relationship, holy living, and a conversion, and they were great missionaries. Okay, next, Roman Catholicism. Oops, I don't have that on a slide. Roman Catholicism in America. Sorry, I didn't mean that to be a slight. I thought I had that on there, but it's not. Not a lot to say about Roman Catholicism, other than what we've already said. It was feared by most Protestants because of the unbiblical teachings that they had experienced in Europe, because of the Romanist suppression of Protestantism in Europe and the threat of Spain and France upon the colonies. So there was an extreme prejudice against Roman Catholicism because of the experience that either the people in the colonies or their ancestors had had with the Roman Catholic Church. The center of Roman Catholicism in the colonies is in what colony? What? Maryland. Maryland was established as a colony for Roman Catholics who were being persecuted in England. John Carroll is the man who is most responsible for helping to establish Roman Catholicism in America. And he was made the first American Roman Catholic bishop. And there's a university named for him today, John Carroll University. All right, any questions about the Roman Catholics in America? All right, the time we have left, let's work on the assignment for tomorrow. You have a number of questions to do. They are number 5 on page 68, numbers 1 through 4 on page 71, numbers 1 through 3 on page 74, and numbers 1 through 3 on page 76. All right, if you didn't get all that, you can look on the board, look on the assignments there. All right, so let's get busy and get those questions done before you leave.